everybody, and welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. We're on our 100th episode, which is very exciting for us.
If we were a high-end podcast, we would have some sort of balloons and hurrahs.
Well, actually, I don't know, our audience can't hear it, but 100 balloons just lifted off the ground.
Those
it
were
was
expensive.
really impressive.
That was a bad spend.
Yeah, whole budget is blown. Anyway, for those of you who are newer to the podcast, I'm Molly Herford. I write about a lot of different sports for a lot of different places, most notably the Outdoor Edit website, which is theoutdooredit.com, and I have a book series getting young girls into bikes that's coming out next winter, which is super exciting.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm eating dark chocolate and very excited about this 100th episode. I am also, when I'm not eating dark chocolate, a registered kinesiologist and endurance coach.
He actually puts his coaching hat on somewhere else when he's eating the dark chocolate. He can't do both at the same time.
You can only have one hat on at once,
yeah.
And my dark chocolate hat is a extravagant hat.
Well, we know most of you have been listening to this specifically for this excellent banter. It's been a fun 100 episodes with you, dear.
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, there's been some really good episodes. I think we've had a really good time with it. We set out with the intention, as I think many podcasts do, of, we'd try it. I don't know what our number was. Was it
20?
I thought we had a 5.
20?
Okay, we're bold. Or not intelligent, I'm not sure, but...
A little bit of both.
Yeah, and those first 20 were good. We learned a little bit about... Audio learning, for sure.
We're still not perfect, but we're working on it.
I think I've switched through several refrains, maybe eliminated some ums. I'm not sure, but anyhow, we've enjoyed it. We've benefited. Hopefully you guys out there have. Certainly we've gotten some feedback that was positive along the way, which is always nice. We've gotten some constructive criticism we've tried to correct, and we've gotten lots of good show guests that were awesome. Some really cool people you guys have introduced us to. You have some amazing friends and heroes and everything else that you've introduced us to, so thank you.
Yeah, when we started this podcast, we just kind of selfishly wanted to interview people not just within our, primary realms of endurance sport, but, really get into other types of sports, because we really love this idea of being the consummate athlete, which is, someone who can go out and go kite surfing one day, rock climbing the next, and then maybe run a 10K the day after that.
And actually today is Family Day and President's Day, so happy holiday to both the North American.
Belated holiday, I guess. Cause
North Americans are generally off, I think, today, depending on the state and province you're in.
So we decided to do our most consummate athlete day. I don't know that it's our most, but
it was pretty good. The town of Collingwood and Blue Mountain had lots of things, so we hit a dancing sort of routine today, which we have a future guest coming up about sort of this dancing and sort of fun dancing, and so it was just sort of in the square at this ski hill in the sort of little village. And we did some social dancing.
Yeah, we also started the day with a swim.
Early morning swim. Then we were over at the gym where Molly actually mostly just did computer work, but I was working with a client, and we did some squats and stuff, worked on some mobility. And then it was to dancing, and then we came home and had a snack.
Walked downtown, the 5K, and then went ice skating again.
Ice skating. Molly's working on her Canadian
cross-country skiing, ice skating. Canadian. I'm getting there. I keep saying I want to play hockey, but then I get on the ice and I'm just terrified, so it's a work in progress. I think the other thing that was interesting is we realized as we pulled ourselves out of the pool that we hadn't actually been in a pool since early July, despite the fact that the Ironman we did was the last day of July. So it's been quite some time. Peter, did you find it difficult to get back in, or did you get back in the groove?
my elbow, I'm still recovering from a bit of an elbow injury, so that was a little bit sore, but I figured it out. I was never that fast, so it didn't really erode that far.
So anyway, for our 100th episode, we decided to actually look back and reflect on a few of our favorite episodes and pull some of our favorite bits and pieces from some of the people that we've had on. We wanted to kind of make a good blend of some of the experts and some of the athletes that have been on. And I mean, man, when we looked through, it's crazy. We had NASCAR racers, NFL players, parkour experts, Krav Maga, tons of golf, actually, which is surprising for the fact that neither of us play.
Well, we've talked about this. I really like golf because a lot of people have played it, but there's a very big mental aspect to it.
Guys, we still don't have a darts or a pool expert on here. If anyone knows a darts or pool expert, please let me know, because I really want to crush it in barroom sports as well as outdoor ones. So keep that in mind. But anyway, we're going to touch on a few of our favorite guests. And first up is, I'd say, the one that came to mind for both of us when we were thinking about this. Peter's brother actually jumped to her right when we mentioned we were going to do this episode. And he said it was one of his favorites. So our first one is Katarina Nash, who is a multi-time Olympian for winter and summer, cross-country skiing, cross-country mountain biking, cyclocross World Cups. She's almost 40 and is still podiuming and winning World Cups in cross. She was 5th in Rio in the mountain bike. She has 2 amazing dogs, so she is one of my favorite humans. And I think what we both really love about her is she not only is this hard-charging, super serious athlete, but she has a really good attitude about it and about still living your life, even as someone who, is so performance oriented.
Yeah, she's very laid back. I've liked her since I first met her, actually. She's just very easygoing. We've gone on a few rides over the years, and yeah, just super chill. I guess that's why she fit into mountain biking well, but yeah, really, we had a really good discussion that sort of goes through, female sport. We go through, her early upbringing in the Czech. We go through cross-country skiing and what that brought to mountain biking, how her form is good so much of the year. She races cyclocross in the fall, winter, and getting world-class results, but then also on the mountain bike, like Molly said, she's going to the Olympics, right? So this is spanning much of the year and hitting these peak performances. So we talk about that. It's just such a great discussion. So what have we have a quote, hopefully we're going to pull here, and we're going to just play that for you guys.
Yeah, so let's get into Katarina Nash.
I look back at this period of my life as we lived in the mountains and we did nothing else than just work out before breakfast, work out before lunch, work out after lunch, and sometimes work out after dinner, 3-4 sessions a day. And all you do is just come home, change, eat, shower, come home, change, stretch, and it was just that was your life. So I don't think I overtrain as hard. Neither do I know it's the most effective way for the sport I'm doing right now. I love the fact that you can just get on your bike, get 3 to 5 hours, be done with it, and still have a half a day to do other stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't train as hard. The one thing that I did have to work on for a really, really long time that we sort of identified with Dean that I was lacking was that I had the intensity, and that really showed in my short track racing. Anybody remembers those years,
Uh-huh.
The short track. So I could show up for short track and just win most of them for a period of time there. But I was, struggling to make top 5 in the cross country race. So I took a long time to improve in that lactate threshold, the kind of race pace for back then 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something I had to work on really hard, and I still do. That's how I get ready for mountain bike events. It's just I do climbing repeats after climbing repeats after climbing repeats. Dean's favorite word. And it's hard, but it's got me where I needed to get with the intensity, cyclocross or the short track, or let's say, anything in between that, like a time trial or anything shorter. That comes around pretty quickly. I don't have even if I don't do it for a while, I do a couple little sessions or a couple of races and it comes back. So that was the one thing I really had to work hard for most of my pure mountain biking career.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as you mentioned, the aging process or getting older, the recovery is definitely a lot slower, and so you have to work that into the training, into the hours, and and kind of play around with that. But the great thing about it is, it's you kind of I don't want to say you don't work as hard, because you still do, but there's just that little piece that that little extra half an hour or an hour spin. Sometimes they just don't. they're not a big deal. And if you skip them, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes it's just, I kind of judge it by, if I'm not excited to get on my bike and just like even changing or coming up with way I'm going to ride or what am I going to do, then I take a day off, and mentally that helped me so much. Mm-hmm. Having said that, maybe 10 years ago, I couldn't mentally be okay with that. I'd be like, oh my God, I'm supposed to do an hour ride today or 2 hour spin, and I need to go do it. And if I don't do it, that's the end of the world, and I'm not going to be good. It's kind of that focus, or just kind of like I go and I just jump on my cruiser bike and run errands, and I'm like, well, I still got on my bike. It wasn't a workout, but I got on my bike and I feel fine. I got outside and got some exercise, and mentally it was more refreshing than just riding, like that for an hour or something like that. So yeah, I play kind of games with myself in my mind. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's always things you can work on, and and like you say, yeah, it's not very inspiring approach to like talk to somebody who's like in their early 20s and be like, it's okay, be patient, in 10 years it's all gonna work.
Okay, next up we have the authors of Peak Performance, Brad Stulberg and Steve Magness. Their book did amazingly well. It's really applicable to both training of kind of whatever sport you're into, but also life, work, play, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we both really enjoyed reading it, and it did really well in sort of the business circles, also in sport, whatever sport, and covers all these concepts around, sleep, how we're going to program training in terms of work rest cycles, what is balance, does balance exist? It had some really, really good concepts. We have a really good talk with them. Steve Magness is tremendous track coach, sort of middle distance sort of running coach, I should say. And, Brad is, very successful writer. So they're a really good team. And we talk a bit about how they work together and the system they developed to write this book.
Yeah. Also, a note, if you go to the show notes, you can find links to all of the original episodes from all of the little clips that we're playing, because we obviously aren't putting everything from the podcast in, and there's so many other great quotes other than these quick little clips.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely go back and check out some of these episodes. Hopefully either ones you haven't checked out if you've maybe joined us later, or ones that you've forgotten or something too. So a lot of them, certainly check out the show notes for the links, and, check out the books if you haven't.
Yeah, so these guys are just so good for bringing the basics in terms of training and life and making them, seem very elevated, but really, ultimately, none of the stuff they're doing is super hacky or gimmicky or anything. It's pretty much just, hey, live like a reasonable person.
Well, and it's true. It's maybe seems easy to discuss it, but a lot of stuff we do need the reminder or the confidence that if we do push those sleep hours up or nap periodically, or rather than just slaving away at the desk for 8 hours a day straight, they talk about work rest cycles where you maybe work for half an hour and take a break, just even for 5 minutes to go walk to the water cooler or whatever, right? Just to break up that focus. And so a lot of us need that reminder sometimes, or those little, you can call them hacks if you want, just to sort of optimize things, right? And again, whether you're in the office or whether you're, even just doing intervals, that's why we do intervals, in whatever sport you do, is to sort of break up that focus and keep the motivation high.
All right, let's get into it.
Getting the work in isn't the problem. And I see this with my elite runners all the time, it's not a hard thing to tell them to do crazy workouts. It's a hard thing for them to almost have the reins pulled back and to settle back and rest. And I think that's where this equation comes into play. It's the same thing we see with like elite marathoners not having the confidence to rest. You see the same thing with CEOs, entrepreneurs, people in their jobs, as they want to grind away and do those 8, 10, 12-hour, 14-hour days of work and not take a step back. So that's why that message is so strong throughout the book, is we all almost want to create this awareness to say, hey, like putting in hard work is great, but it needs to be very focused. You need to have a point to doing it. just like you'd have a point out on the on the track saying I'm going to do mile repeats at this pace to get this workout in. You need to have the same point in your life, and then when you come off of it, you need to schedule and have the confidence to rest.
I think that the whole stress plus rest equals growth, right? You want to stress yourself as much as possible without burning out, and that's how you get the greatest growth or the greatest training adaptation. But when you get close to that line, it's easy to cross it inadvertently, and it's also easy to get very caught up in the stress side of the equation without giving the rest side of the equation the prioritization that it needs. I know we touched on that a little bit earlier. I just think that, the athletics culture is so much about pushing, right? I grew up with quotes like, if you're not, I forgot what the exact quote is, but someone's always working harder than you. So work.
Yes.
And I think with social media and other venues for athletes to post all the work that they're doing all the time, it almost always seems like as an athlete, someone else is outworking you. So it's almost like all of the forces are on that work side of the equation. Very few are encouraging rest. So I think that athletes tend to overdo it, right? It's the combination of wanting to push yourself as close to that line as possible, but not crossing it. And then all this reinforcement to push, that unfortunately leads a lot of athletes to push too hard.
Okay, next up, we have one of my very good friends, Carolyn Gaynor. So she's not your typical athlete. Carolyn and I raced together back in college. We did a bunch of crits together. She's posted some pictures, if you want to go back far enough, where I'm racing a crit with a helmet that's, practically falling off my forehead, and I still have my aero bar holders clipped onto my road bike. So that's how far back we go. But after kind of getting out of competitive sport, she got into guiding. So now she guides all kinds of different distances and races, but primarily Ironman triathletes who have sight issues. So she, swims tethered to blind triathletes and rides on a tandem and runs attached to them. And, the training that goes into just finishing an Ironman in general is crazy. And she's doing a few of them a season pretty casually.
And she's got a full-time job that she has to travel for.
Yeah. Oh, and she went to Kona this year, too, to race.
And they finished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's crazy. And I love her. And
we spoke to her right before, not right before, but in the lead up in the 5 months before our Ironman. And so I really went after her to try and get some of these, well, how do you finish, on this limited schedule? So I found it really interesting to speak to her about sort of how she gets through these things, because it's not just that she's she's fitter than them, so she just sandbags. Like you can't sandbag. There's no coasting, right? Like she still has to survive this long swim, and you have to survive a marathon run. Like there's no coasting on a run, right? And then you're also out there potentially for quite some time, right? Like their finish times are not record times, but they are finishing, within the time limit. So there's
a great quote by the guy that was last to the Lanterne Rouge in the Tour de France, where he says he was the hardest working guy out there because he's the one that was out there the longest every single day.
Right.
And, she's not finishing last in these, but yeah, she's out there for a lot of hours. But kind of more than the training, what we found so interesting about this was actually something that Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus is what I was going to say, talk about a bunch, which is knowing your why. And for her why is helping other athletes. So she has a much more, altruistic view of sport than a lot of us do, to be honest.
Well, and really our podcast, right? Like we were really looking at, none of us are going to go to the Olympics, presumably, if we're listening, although I think...
Okay, maybe some of you are.
Sometimes Katarina listens, so maybe some of us are going. I apologize if you're going to the Olympics, all three of you.
We take it back.
Thank you for being one of the 6 listeners. It's a very high-end group that listens, but... All that to say, a lot of us are past the point where we're going to do anything. We're going to get paid to play and stuff like this. So, why do you do it then, right? And I think, a lot of athletes I work with, we're always sort of questioning this, right? Like, is it just for fun? Are we pursuing, a personal best still? So in this one, we're talking about maybe finding another why by helping other people complete Ironman that maybe couldn't, right?
Yeah.
So... it's a different twist on it too. Some of us will do charity rides and things like this. And so this is, to me, another progression, another option. And I'm sure there's other similar, there's Paralympic, paracycling, things like this.
It's crazy
I think
easy.
in obstacle course racing, they have things similar as well. So, the challenge here as consummate athletes is finding a reason that we're doing new sports, finding a reason that we're continuing to do the sports we know and love, finding new challenges, right? So I think this one might have been overlooked, but is one that I would love you guys to go back and listen to and sort of pull something out for your own, situation, your own life. And I think there's a lot of really good stuff from this episode.
I do this talk where I tell this story a lot, but I'll give you guys the actual sort of more in-depth version, which is it's not necessarily longer, but so graduated in 2006, 2007 I had a pretty good season, posted some times that were good for me, relatively speaking. And then I had a really hard year in 2008. So 2008 is when I started guiding, but I was dealing with just a lot of personal stuff, and I was just struggling. And I think my sleep was all messed up, and I wasn't diagnosed, but I'm pretty confident that I had adrenal fatigue syndrome. And so I was signed up for the New York City Triathlon that year in 2008. I was signed up in the elite age group wave, which I had done the year before, and I'd done well enough. But I was just feeling terrible. I was having trouble running 10 minutes a mile, which was many minutes per mile slower than I would normally go. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine, this guy Matt Miller. He runs Base Nutrition now, and he had a charity called See Different, where he would connect blind athletes with guides. And I don't think it exists anymore, but anyway, it was somebody I knew, but I hadn't known any women that were doing it. And he said, "Hey, I have a girl coming into New York. She's doing the New York City Triathlon, but she doesn't have a guide yet." And this was 1 week before the race. And so, when some people paint this picture, they're like, "Oh, she was super competitive and she was, going to go out and kill this elite age group wave." And it's that's not the case. I think that guiding that race helped me as much or more than it helped, the athletes that I raced with. And I also just had a fantastic time. So thankfully she was a new athlete. Even though I wasn't feeling great, I was still totally able to keep up with whatever she needed me to do. But in terms of my own abilities, I wasn't anywhere near where I wanted to be for myself.
Okay, this next one up is actually kind of sad because the guy on this podcast actually passed away in the past few months. But we really wanted to include Total Immersion Swimming and Terry Laughlin because we were lucky enough to get him on the podcast. And it was such a good episode for how to learn something new as an adult. And I think it especially rang true for Peter, who was learning how to swim.
Yeah, we talked about how the podcast was largely a selfish endeavor, and a lot of our themes for the sort of 50 to 100 or maybe 50 to 75 episodes was to help with triathlon. So we had Rich Patey on talking about how to triathlon. We just spoke about Carolyn on with her guiding in triathlon. And then we had Terry on about swimming. And total immersion's a big deal. A lot of people are able to are able to learn to swim. These are adults, and he called them adult onset swimmers. People who didn't swim professionally or at a high level as kids, where you swim you figure it out and you're into it. So once you become an adult, often it becomes harder, right? So his systems are really, really good, and they're criticized by some of the serious swimmers, swimmer only people. But I think what gets missed is the systems they have get people who are scared on some level, to put their face in the water, to start swimming, don't know how to float, their feet sink. It's really hard. So for me, it was transformative and really, really helped. And, I found a couple other things along the way that also helped with speed and stuff as I got comfortable. But for me, that total immersion was really good. And this episode is filled with stuff that is very actionable if you're trying to learn to swim, but also some good coaching sort of philosophy stuff as well that I thought was really, really good. So, we put this in here, like Molly says, it's a little sad Terry passed away this past year, but I think the episode was another really, really good one, an earlier one for us, but quite good.
All right, let's get to it.
My three would be, and I thought about this after you sent the question. So the first would be efficiency or economy. That your goal is to find the easiest way to perform any task in the water, because we are hugely wasteful. As human swimmers, we are hugely wasteful. The average untutored or uncoached swimmer converts only 3% of energy into forward motion, which means 97% is wastefully diverted. So energy economy would be the first, and balance or weightlessness would be the next, because that's the very first thing you must master in order to be an efficient, economical swimmer. And then third is moving with grace or fluency, because you want to move like water, and when you're in the water. So.
Okay, next up we have Steven Seiler. And Steven came to my attention based on a tweet of his Seiler's hierarchy of training needs, which is basically a play on Maslow's hierarchy of need, but it's Seiler's version of it, and it's based on training. And I thought it was the most brilliant depiction of what we all need to be doing and kind of what most of our training needs to look like.
Yeah, it was really quite interesting. It reinforces that rather than looking at things like altitude and, this magical pill that, a lot of us need, sleep and the fundamentals of being a human, right? And that's what Maslow's hierarchy indicated. You need sleep, you need food, you need shelter, that sort of stuff, right? So that's what Seiler was trying to get at with this, was before you get crazy and trying to do special intervals or anything like that, the time you're spent riding, again, sleep, and just being a healthy human, which again rings true with what we were doing with this podcast, being able to move as a human. And so that was really why we had him on, but that certainly is not all Steven Seiler is.
Yeah, he's an exercise scientist working over in Europe, although I think he's from Texas, so I think he's got a bit of a Texas drawl when you talk to
Texas
him.
Mixed with, was it Norway?
Yeah. Texan and Norway. So yeah, we talked about a bunch of the other experiments and stuff he's been doing in the field of really high-level elite athletes, and talked a bit about how they can be applied to, some of your more average people like us.
Yeah, I mean, his most famous stuff is his name is on a lot of the studies based around polarized training. So they're taking, the training of, big cross-country skiers or professional athletes, elites, and then looking at how much of the time in each year or each 4 years or the whole lifetime of the professional athlete, even in some cases, how much of this is spent in high intensity, medium intensity, low intensity. And a lot of the studies that they've done have shown that indeed there's a large proportion spent in that low intensity endurance range, and then on the high intensity range, and not as much in the middle. And so this is quite controversial still. The threshold training, we just finished a podcast, number 99 was with Steve Neal, sort of how he comes to terms with that. And this has been a topic we've sort of been back and forth with, because it's quite central to how you organize your own training. And so we talked to Steven indeed about how does this apply only to elites, or does it apply to the consummate athlete, to the everyday working class person with 8 hours to train?
And as usual, I feel like the answer is sometimes.
Yeah, it depends. It's always it depends. But I think it gives you what the polarized training is and how you can apply it. And he also gives you, back to the Maslow sort of the hierarchy of needs, it gives you some good training principles. And there's a couple quotes in there that are just gold. So here you go. I hope you enjoy this clip.
We just mentioned the whole 1% thing, but that sort of, leads very nicely into your hierarchy of endurance training, where if you don't have that big bottom chunk, all the 1% in the world aren't really gonna.
That's right. 1% of a little bitty pie is still not much of a victory. So you've got to build the base. You've got to have a basic capacity before the 1% matters. Before the altitude camp matters, or the hypoxia tent, or all these things that just 40 to 50-year-old men love to buy because they
I was going to say
power.
carbon deep dish wheels and aerodynamic spokes.
It's just the best story I remember when I was a student back in college. I was climbing a hill on my bike, which was a Cannondale at the time. This was in the late 80s, I guess. And I was happy with my Cannondale. And then I came upon another fella, and I pulled up beside him on the hill, so I was able to chase him down, and he had a fancy carbon bike, and this was in the 80s, so this was very new. It was a Panasonic carbon frame, and we ended up talking, and he asked me, well, do you want to try it out? And I said, no, I would never be able to afford it, and besides, I caught you anyway. So that was always my thought I thought as long as I train well, then I can live with the other guy having a fancier bike, because he had a couple extra kilos around the midsection. And so I decided that I would save money by keeping my body weight down and let him worry about the few hundred grams on his bike weight, And that's just kind of how it ends up being. When you're in your 40s and that, you're looking for shortcuts. I've been there. You're looking for magic, and it's easy to be caught up in the hype. With whatever the journalist throws out there or the media throws out there as the newest cool training method or technology, and it almost never lives up to the hype. Mm-hmm. But what does work is the basics. Still, it's just the basics.
Sven Nys needs no introduction for 99.9% of you listening. If you haven't heard his name before, big name cyclocrosser, biggest name cyclocrosser, really. You could hear where he was in a World Cup on the course based on where the roars were coming.
And he really transformed the sport of cyclocross, right? Like in Belgium, it would be like saying Wayne Gretzky in Canada or Michael Jordan in the U.S.,
Thank
right?
you
like
for
this,
the U.S. edition.
This is a big deal.
So,
he is a big deal,
yeah.
Right? So
I cornered him in the pit at Cross Vegas a couple years ago because he now actually has retired from racing but still works with the Trek Telenet Fidea team. And he was, just hanging out in the pit. So I sort of grabbed him and asked him what his top tip for racing was. And, it's great advice for anyone who wants to be at that highest level. And I think it serves as an amazing reminder of what it takes to be one of the world's best in cyclocross.
Yeah, and this episode was short, but it was definitely one of our top ones, right? It was, people love Sven Nys, and the advice is good. And I think the important thing is, this quote really emphasizes, you just need to focus on that one thing, right? And you don't have to focus on it as consummate athletes. We want to do lots of different things, but if you're trying to learn to swim right now,
that's what you got to do.
Focus on that, right? Spend time on that. Don't get distracted.
Yeah. All right, let's hear from him.
You need to live 365 days in a year for your sport. That helps a lot, not for a small period. And you need to have the passion from day one until the last day.
Yeah.
And if you have that and love the sport even in your last year, then everything is possible.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to have talent, you need to have good technique that helps that you not have a bad crash, but you need to have a bit of luck also.
Absolutely.
And for me, that all came together.
Yeah.
And that made that I have a long career.
Yeah. Okay, this next one is possibly the most consummate athlete of the people we've ever had on this podcast.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Like, I think it's an important message.
Okay, I mean, I can't think of anyone that's kind of a better fit for this all-around, all-the-time moving than Katie Bowman.
Well, and that's it. I think for a lot of us who are athletes and consider ourselves athletes, Katie gives us sort of, some food for thought. What are we doing when we're not exercising? We have that hour, that maybe 2 hours a day, if we're lucky, where we can train. But how are we moving? Are we moving the rest of the day? And so that's a large part of her philosophy, very simplified. She has several books, some about foot pain. She has some about moving all the time.
I think the most recent is Movement Matters, correct?
Right, and so that's what we spoke to her about, and it really goes into this, the cellular level of your movement. What is the effect of, she talks, the most microscopic one I can think about is tea bags, not doing that movement of actually grinding the tea, let alone putting the tea into a tea bag. So she's saying, we're outsourcing a lot of the movement we're doing. That's a very, simplified, very small example. But things like chairs, rather than sitting on the ground. What are some other ones she has? The heeled shoe is the classic one that she's all about, right? So the minimalist shoe for walking, not going crazy and running marathons in them, but just during the day, how many of these heeled shoes are shortening your calf muscles and then affecting how your feet work?
I mean, I think for us, one of the biggest takeaways was just to remind us to walk more. We both do that a ton. We walk pretty much all of our errands. Farmers carry our groceries home.
Indeed. So you're now what she calls stacking your grocery shopping, and we walk together. So we're stacking some relationship time with getting food acquisition, and then also some exercise time, some movement time.
We got to start foraging. 2018 goals.
Well, that could make it harder, I guess. But yeah, so Katie's really, really cool. If you have time, if you have foot pain, ankle pain, I recommend her book. I send people to her book all the time for that. If you're curious about this non-exercise activity, which is becoming a trend and interest here in a lot of studies and hashtags, you can definitely check out Movement Matters.
I would definitely say, if I think about the last couple years since I've started walking more compared to when I was just strictly training and then existing, I am in such better shape now than I ever was when I was just, running for an hour a day and that was it.
Well, and I speak quite often to clients about, I've just basically taken, probably a couple hours of endurance out of my cycling training. And certainly I rarely do endurance rides anymore. And so my on-bike time is very focused. I'm in the gym, hopefully a couple times a week. And then walking makes up a lot of that low-end aerobic that used to be easy spins on the road or, just junk aerobic sort of endurance miles, and now we're walking or hiking up at the mountain and stuff, right? And you can debate the specificity of it, but I would probably turn around and say, how much more do I need to do 15 years into doing it, right? So that's sort of a rambling bit. We picked one of the quotes, but I think this one, I was super nervous for this podcast. We did it in a linen closet, and just to try and get the sound perfect, and she was quite nice, but I was quite nervous. She was probably the biggest person. I don't want to say that, but she was
at the time
the person I was the most nervous for, I guess. So
absolutely.
So hopefully that doesn't come off, or maybe it does come off and it's comical, but this quote is good, and hopefully you'll go back and listen to this episode.
When you eat, there's not really good foods or bad foods as much as you need a very specific spectrum of foods, because your cells operate on the right amount of many different nutrients. And so when you have a nutritional deficiency, there's a very specific illness or a range of illnesses that erupts in people who are missing very specific nutrients. And so over time, when you see those same ailments, someone qualified in dietary nutrients, like, oh, those are symptoms of a deficiency of vitamin this or vitamin that. With movement, it's very similar, where you can take something good, like let's say cycling, which is, a perfectly fine motion. But if your movement diet is solely one type of nutrient over and over and over again, you're going to find yourself depleted in other areas, as well as, just if we go back to dietary nutrients, vitamin D is great. If you don't have vitamin D, there are many ailments that erupt. But if you get too much vitamin D, that vitamin D is now also toxic. You will shut your organs down by taking too much vitamin D. So it's always to remember that the dose of the range of nutrients is what it takes to be healthy, meaning it's what it takes for your system to function without some indication of malnutrition. So I would suggest that most of us are suffering from movement malnutrition, whether it's someone who's doing zero movement at all, or it's someone who's consuming a very high amount of one particular nutrient over and over and over again. Because then if we want to now convert it to mechanical terms, you've got stress risers, injury makers. One of the things that's really key to my work is that people can widen their perspective from people being either active or sedentary to within your own body. There are active and sedentary parts. There are parts of you that you use all the time, and there are parts of you that you've never used. And that to understand that the protective benefits of exercise are on the cellular level. And some benefits to exercise are global, meaning you can do something with one part of your body and thereby nourish all parts of your body. But you can also do things with one part of your body that doesn't do the same thing to all parts of your body as it's doing to that one part of your body. So, for example, if you're a cyclist, you're using your legs in a particular way, and that helps you adapt to that thing that you're doing. But when you transition to something different, like maybe like bone loss is a big thing in cyclists quite often, or that you can actually start with a particular bone density in certain areas, and then after training, you can see a decrease in certain locations that have not had to be weight bearing due to the bicycle carrying the bulk of your weight. Okay. So that cycling, yes, there are definitely whole body adaptations, but there are also local ones within the body. And just because some whole body measures like your VO2 max or your resting heart rate are getting better, those don't necessarily translate to all of your cells receiving the same protective benefit of exercise. That it's complicated, and that your cells are all adapting to their particular mechanical environment, and that depends on the loads that you experience while you're moving.
Okay, our last clip in our 100th episode actually comes not about sport, but about one of our other favorite hobbies. So when we found out about Jax Moriash, this ultra running Wonder Woman who also manages a coffee roastery and now 2 locations for Stoked Roasters, and has little packets of instant coffee, really good espresso beans, tons of cool stuff going on, we were super stoked to talk to her. I actually just posted about Stoked Sticks the other day and had someone say a coffee called Stoked is the most Molly thing I've ever seen.
Well, I wasn't sure whether they thought it was like a candy that you liked that was coffee flavored and had the word Stoked in it. That's how I read that.
I don't think so. I think you got the coffee thing.
Anyway. Most consummate athletes, you're doing a lot of activity, you're getting out there, you're maybe pushing some limits. So coffee just makes sense. It's part of a lot of endurance. It's a part of a lot of just sport atmospheres. It's part of
digestive atmospheres.
The social aspect, it's a big part of it. So, this is a good one to finish on. If you didn't check out the episode, check it out. If you need coffee, they ship.
Absolutely.
I think at least all through the U.S. I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure that's all U.S.
Definitely U.S.
And
let's end on how to brew the perfect cup of coffee. Enjoy, guys.
Like back in the day, I was a road racer that turned to trail, and then with ultras, it's like you have such high mileage weeks that it's hard to okay, now I need to go do massage and strength training and body work and hot tub and, all this stuff. And for the 4 Deserts Racers, if you want to win, you absolutely 100% have to do all that stuff. And in the past, I would kind of get away with just my running program. So I would do a series of squats and glute exercises every single morning while my coffee brewed. And then I would do a core workout every single day that I had created. It was called the Core Challenge, and it's 100 days of exercises that take 10 to 15 minutes. And I literally religiously did that every single day. And if I didn't do that, I would kind of feel weak. I have a Bodum Burr coffee grinder. It's my favorite grinder ever. And how it works is it's by seconds of how long it's going to grind. And so based off of what a amount you have, you're using seconds, and then based off of what grind you want, you're actually changing where the burr is sitting on the top, so you're spinning the top. And so the top is set on French press, and then for me it's 15 seconds. So I'm not sure what that weight is, but I could actually figure it out.
Yeah, I think the classic that you always see is like I think it's 2 tablespoons for a 6-ounce cup, or for 6 ounces, I guess, in the press. So it's a surprising amount. I think is usually people run too much water. Is that sort of the more common error? Do you think that we're going too much water for the amount of coffee, or not enough coffee?
Either it's that, or like if they're not. I mean, the biggest thing is the grind. So if like folks will get these like hand grinders, and then it's like, what kind of grind is that? And they're using that for all different kinds of brewing equipment. So it's like a French press, the grind is extremely coarse. And for a espresso, let's say, or other, like your drip brewer somewhere in the middle, espresso is super fine. So here I can tell you, actually I just weighed it. It's 64 grams is what my sweet spot is for a 32-ounce press.
Hey guys, before you go, we just wanted to have one quick word from our sponsor, Health IQ.
Health IQ is a life insurance company that helps the consummate athlete like you save money on your life insurance.
To find out more, you can check out healthiq.com/CAPOD. That's CAPOD for all the details and to take a free quiz. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Consummate Athlete Podcast. To check out all of the show notes for this show, go to consummateathlete.com, and to follow along with our various adventures on the social medias, you can check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/consummateathlete, or follow me, Molly Herford, at Molly J. Herford on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm at Peter Glassford on Twitter and Instagram.
And if you could do us a huge favor and rate and review the podcast over on iTunes, that helps us bring on more guests, get more episodes out, and do more cool stuff. So we would be forever grateful.
And if you're looking for coaching for endurance sport or just for health and wellness, you can check out smartathlete.ca. And for amazing outdoor content, you can check out theoutdooredit.com.
Aw, honey.
And that's theoutdooredit.com for Molly Herford's writing and all things outdoors.
All right. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.